Pearl Harbor, movie versus history. The movie Pearl Harbor is a war epic directed by Michael Bay that brought to the screen a massive spectacle full of emotion, action, and romance, making it a phenomenon that left a deep impression on millions of viewers worldwide. Although the film excels in visual effects, acting performances, and suspenseful directing, it often relies on inaccuracies and simplifications that historians consider far removed from the reality of the actual attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. This gap between cinematic portrayal and historical fact shows how reality can be reshaped in the service of entertainment and emotion, influencing our perception of this key event of World War II. And so today, we'll take a look at how Pearl Harbor handles history and where it diverges from reality. In the film Pearl Harbor, the character played by Ben Affleck joins the so-called Eagle Squadron, a unit made up of American pilots serving in Britain's Royal Air Force before the United States entered the war. Here, however, several historical inaccuracies arise. First, active members of the US military, meaning also the US Army Air Corps, and after June 1941, the US Army Air Forces, could not legally join the Eagle Squadrons. Anyone who wanted to serve in the RAF had to first leave US military service and become a civilian. American law prohibited active servicemen from serving in foreign armies. In reality, the Eagle Squadrons were composed of volunteers, American civilians who often traveled on their own to Canada, and from there to Great Britain to enlist in the RAF. Another inaccuracy in the film concerns the Spitfire fighter flown by Affleck's character. The filmmakers marked the plane with the code RF, which in reality identified the 303rd Polish Fighter Squadron, a famous unit made up of Polish pilots who had escaped from occupied Poland and played a crucial role in the Battle of Britain. It's unclear why the filmmakers chose this particular marking, perhaps for visual appeal or due to carelessness in consulting historians. In fact, an American pilot in the Eagle Squadron would have flown with the code of his actual squadron, such as XR, the identifier of the 71st Squadron, one of the 3 American RAF squadrons. It's also worth noting that the Eagle Squadrons were not formed until 1940, after the Battle of Britain had already begun. Furthermore, no Eagle Squadron pilot was present at Pearl Harbor during the Japanese attack, nor did any return to Hawaii immediately before the attack, as the film suggests. In the movie, the plot climaxes with a dramatic reconstruction of the famous Doolittle raid on Japan, carried out in retaliation for Pearl Harbor and intended to boost American morale. According to the film, Doolittle's men struck exclusively at Tokyo, the heart of the Japanese Empire. In reality, however, the raid targeted several cities. In addition to Tokyo, bombs were dropped on Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe, all important centers of industry, military, and logistics. While the raid caused only limited physical damage, it had a huge psychological impact on Japan's leadership and population, who had previously believed the home islands to be untouchable. The raid was also a logistical and technical first. It was the only time US twin-engine bombers ever took off from an aircraft carrier. The crews knew they wouldn't have enough fuel to return and planned instead to land in China, which led to immense suffering. Some men were captured, others executed, and many died in crash landings. Even more confusing is the film's portrayal of Rafe and Danny as fighter pilots who effortlessly joined Doolittle's bomber mission. In reality, the role of a fighter pilot and that of a bomber crewman were completely different, requiring different training, different aircraft, and different tactics. There is no historical basis for fighter pilots participating in such a mission. In Pearl Harbor, Japanese aircraft swarm over the American base chaotically, like an angry cloud of bees rather than a disciplined military force. Director Michael Bay chose this stylization deliberately to make the attacking planes appear more menacing. While visually impressive, this depiction is historically inaccurate. The attack on Pearl Harbor was carefully planned, and Japanese planes operated in precisely organized formations. Each group had a specific role. Torpedo bombers, dive bombers, fighters, and high-altitude bombers coordinated their strikes according to plan. The first wave targeted US aircraft and airfields to minimize the threat of aerial defense. Hickam, Wheeler, and Bellows airfields were among the first objectives. Only afterward did the Japanese strike the warships in the harbor. The film alters this sequence for dramatic effect. When the battleships are hit first, the spectacle feels more immediate and powerful. The explosions of the battleship Arizona or the capsizing of the Oklahoma make for gripping visuals. But from a military standpoint, such an approach would have been risky. Leaving American aircraft untouched would have allowed for a counterattack. The movie also exaggerates the capabilities of the period's aircraft. P-40S and Japanese Zeros are shown performing aerobatic duels with maneuvers that would have been impossible in reality. While both the P-40 and the Zero were formidable for their time, they lacked the agility to carry out the extreme stunts shown on screen. Adding to the inaccuracy, the film's P-40S are the P-40N model, which wasn't introduced until 1943. 2 years after the attack on Pearl Harbor. In the film Pearl Harbor, the central role is played by the romantic triangle between Rafe, Evelyn, and Danny. This love story takes up a significant portion of the film's runtime and serves mainly as the emotional engine of the entire plot. From a historical perspective, however, this storyline has no basis in real events that took place during the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. In reality, such a dramatic romance directly tied to the events of that fateful day almost certainly never occurred. Pearl Harbor was above all a tragedy, a military failure, and a turning point that drew the United States fully into World War II. The lives of individual soldiers and nurses at that time were filled with tension, fear, and unexpected challenges. But no such love triangle story is historically preserved or remembered. The film also offers a distorted view of women's roles in that era. The character of Evelyn and other female figures are depicted mostly as romantic interests or emotional support for the male protagonists. The reality, however, was different. Women played an absolutely crucial role during World War II that went far beyond romanticized notions. While men fought at the front, women at home and overseas replaced them in armaments industries, transportation, science, and administration. They served not only as nurses on the battlefield, but also as pilots in auxiliary air units, worked in intelligence, and in many other fields where their skills were urgently needed. In one of the film's opening scenes set during the childhood of the main characters, a Stearman biplane appears, used as a crop-dusting aircraft to spray fields. The scene is set in 1923 and is meant to evoke the atmosphere of rural America at the time. Here, however, the filmmakers got ahead of history. In reality, specially modified planes for commercial crop dusting in the US only began to be used in 1924. The first recorded commercial flight of this kind took place that year in Mississippi, spraying cotton against invasive insects. Later, in 1926, the US Department of Agriculture joined in, adopting crop dusting officially. The Stearman, specifically models like the Stearman Model 75, most often associated today with crop dusting, was not even produced until the 1920s-30s and only became widely used for spraying after World War II, when surplus training aircraft from the US Air Force flooded the market. Aircraft used for crop dusting in the 1920s were mostly older, modified World War I military planes, such as the Curtiss JN-4 Jenny. The film also freely invents when portraying President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The famous scene where Roosevelt rises from his wheelchair to prove to his cabinet that nothing is impossible is pure fiction. Roosevelt never exploited his illness for such theatrical gestures. In fact, he tried to conceal its effects as much as possible, so as not to evoke pity or doubts about his leadership. In the Pearl Harbor movie, one of the key dramatic moments is when Admiral Husband E. Kimmel receives a report that American forces near Pearl Harbor have attacked an enemy submarine. In the film, this serves to suggest that warning of the impending Japanese attack came in time but was mishandled, contributing to the disaster. Reality, however, was different, and the film significantly distorts events. On December 7th, 1941, a periscope of an enemy submarine was indeed spotted near the entrance to the harbor, and the American destroyer USS Ward attacked it shortly after 6:30 a.m., firing shells and dropping depth charges. This was, in fact, the first American military action against Japanese forces that day. Ward's crew immediately reported the incident, but the warning moved slowly up the chain of command and was not assessed as an imminent threat of a major attack. Admiral Kimmel received the report only with a long delay, not before the attack, as the film suggests, but when Japanese aircraft were already bombing the harbor. Thus, the warning did come, but it failed due to misinterpretation and slow response. Interestingly, the USS Ward achieved a historical first that morning. Its shots at the Japanese mini-submarine were the very first fired by Americans in World War II. One of the few truly historical heroes depicted in the film is Dory Miller, a ship's cook who bravely manned an anti-aircraft gun during the attack on the West Virginia and saved the lives of fellow sailors. His courage was real, but the film makes no attempt to capture the reality of racial segregation at the time. In the scene where Kate Beckinsale's character tends to Miller, we see a white nurse caring alone for a black sailor, a situation that in 1941 would have been highly improbable. Strict segregation rules applied in military hospitals, and even in crisis situations, Miller would likely have been treated in a segregated ward or with different personnel present. One of the most emotionally powerful moments in the film is the scene where Japanese planes deliberately attack a hospital, killing doctors, nurses, and wounded. This image is meant to emphasize the cruelty and inhumanity of the attack. But historically, such an event never happened. Japanese aircraft in the Pearl Harbor attack had no orders to target hospitals, medical facilities, or humanitarian sites, and no directives from Japanese command included such actions. The primary objectives were warships, especially the battleships moored in the harbor, and airfields and hangars on Oahu Island, whose destruction was meant to prevent a rapid American counterattack. Hospitals, including the Naval Hospital Pearl Harbor and the Tripler Army Medical Center, suffered only incidental damage, mostly from shrapnel or bombs hitting nearby targets. For example, the hospital on Ford Island admitted many wounded during the attack itself, working under great strain and difficult conditions, but it was not a direct target. Interestingly, Japanese command originally considered attacking supply depots and other logistical sites that would have further crippled US naval defense in the Pacific, but ultimately chose to focus on ships and aircraft. While civilian or unintended sites may have been hit in the chaos, this was not part of the plan and was not deliberate. In the film Pearl Harbor, audiences are shown a number of visually striking scenes that, however, often clash with historical reality. For example, during the scene where nurses travel by ferry across Pearl Harbor, the USS Arizona Memorial can be seen in the background. Yet this powerful symbol of the victims of the Pearl Harbor attack did not actually exist in 1941. The memorial was only completed in 1962 and became a place of remembrance long after the war. In the film, Isoroku Yamamoto is depicted directly overseeing the attack from the deck of a carrier. In reality, Yamamoto commanded from a safe distance at a Japanese base and was not physically present aboard a carrier during the attack. He was the strategist behind the operation, not an on-scene participant in the battle at sea. In one scene, soldiers in Hawaii are shown listening tensely to radio chatter between members of Doolittle's team during their daring raid on Japan. In 1941, however, radio technology was nowhere near advanced enough to allow troops in Hawaii to hear the voices of air crews operating off the coast of Japan. The bombers in the Doolittle raid carried only low-power shortwave radios intended for close communication between aircraft or with their carrier. These radios had a limited range, tens or hundreds of kilometers at most, and could never transmit voice across the Pacific Ocean. Moreover, the raid was conducted under radio silence, a standard tactic for secret or high-risk missions to avoid detection. Crews communicated only when absolutely necessary, and then briefly and in code. In Pearl Harbor, a jeep is shown driving across a golf course to deliver an urgent message about the attack. At first glance, it seems the filmmakers chose the right vehicle. Jeeps are iconic symbols of the US Army in World War II. But a closer look reveals it is actually the M38 model, which doesn't fit the wartime timeline at all. The M38 was the post-war successor to the famous Willys MB Jeep, entering service in 1950 during the Korean War. Compared to the wartime MB, the M38 had differences such as a sturdier build, higher fenders, improved electrics, and a waterproof engine. Unlike the MB, which served in huge numbers during World War II, the M38 never became part of the Pacific War's imagery because it didn't yet exist. And that's all from us on the differences between Pearl Harbor and the real events of the Japanese attack of the time. How much do you enjoy Michael Bay's film? What do you think of its historical deviations? Can you think of any others? Let us know in the comments.